What if the strongest man in history, the hero chosen by God, was brought to his knees by love, betrayal, and his own choices? This is the story of Samson, a legend of strength, failure, and ultimate redemption. Is it possible that your decisions have ever held you back, as if a prison of bad choices were building up around you? Envision a man whose incredible power betrays his innate heroism, as do the desires and errors he let to flourish in his life. A biblical figure whose deeds and tragedies have taught us lessons about strength, frailty, redemption, and sacrifice. This man is Samson, a man of great power, widely recognized as Samson, muses on his life's ups and downs while incarcerated in a Philistine prison. Even though he is now legally blind, his mind is sharper than before. His eyes were previously brilliant and penetrating. He reflects on the innumerable fights he had, both externally and inside. As he sighs, he regrets not listening to his parents' advice. Even though he is behind bars, his memories remain free, and he tells his narrative with a mix of sadness and optimism. Samson understood his destiny to do great things from an early age. Though he was unaware of it at times, his strength was both physical and spiritual. During his lifetime, the Israelites, his people, were enslaved by the Philistines. He gained self-assurance and, paradoxically, haughtiness with every victory. According to him, I failed because I was arrogant. At the time, he thought nothing could stand in his way. However, now that he is ensnared and ashamed, he knows that the secret to strength is faith and humility. His own decisions laid the groundwork for his eventual demise. He possessed all the qualities necessary to be an outstanding leader, but his actions were frequently influenced by his emotions and passions. How many times had his parents warned him against women from the Philistine tribe? They warned you that they will only cause problems for you. Samson, however, was disgraced because he was obstinate and devoted to his cause. He disregarded each prohibited romance until they became an insurmountable mountain, much like a stone in his way. He misses his glory days even more now that he's in prison. Recalling the triumphs over his adversaries, the festivity, and the hymns performed in his honor, he reminisces. Reflecting on his heroic deeds, he muses with a subtle smile. On the other hand, recalling his triumphs brings back the sting of his own setbacks. He tells himself, if I could turn back the clock, I would do everything differently. He knows this isn't feasible, but says it nevertheless. We may all learn from the tragedy that befell Samson. He demonstrates that power is meaningless in the absence of knowledge. He says, I had the strength of 1,000 men, but I failed to use my head. He shakes his head in regret. It serves as a cautionary tale to make us think twice before acting. For everything we do has an effect. Every careless choice Samson made brought him closer to his awful fate. Nevertheless, he remains defiant. He believes his narrative should serve as a cautionary tale instead. His faith is rekindled in the midst of the prison's shadows. He believes that God has never left him. Samson is encouraged and strengthened by the divine presence, even while he is going through the worst of times. He now knows that he had to fall in order to learn what strength really is. He draws the conclusion that faith and humility are the sources of true strength. Even when it seems like all hope is lost, this awareness is what keeps him steadfast. Samson thinks back on the struggles he had inside as well. It was frequently more challenging than fighting the Philistines to fight against his own desires and shortcomings. The biggest enemy is inside us, he whispers. He reflects on how he frequently gave into temptation, disregarding the cautions and indicators all around him. We can all relate to Samson's struggle, because his story teaches us to be brave when we fight our own personal demons. But his recollections are marked by more than simply melancholy. He fondly remembers the moments when he led his people with honor. To his delight, he reflects on how he motivated them to fight. His bravery and resolve served as an inspiration to the Israelites on numerous occasions. In spite of everything that went wrong, he is comforted by the knowledge that he touched the lives of many. When Samson thinks back on his life, he sees how every fight, victory or loss, molded him. According to him, we are what we've been through. He has emotional and spiritual wounds in addition to bodily ones. Also, a tale or lesson can be gleaned from each one. He wishes his experience could help others avoid similar pitfalls by sharing his story. Samson uses his time alone in prison to think about forgiveness. Am I forgiven by God? He wonders to himself. In times of quiet contemplation, this is a thought that crosses the minds of many. Because God is merciful, Samson thinks this to be true. Finally, Jesus says that forgiveness is the way to salvation. Even in the worst of times, he maintains hope because of this idea. When Samson thinks back on his youth, he sees a boy who was full of hope and potential. I aspired to be a hero, he says, remembered. And he was somewhat successful. However, there were many highs and lows, successes and failures along the way. Wisdom, humility, and faith are more important than heroic actions, he has come to understand. He embodies the ideals of a hero in these ways. The events of Samson's life take readers on a wild ride of emotions, with many unexpected turns. His goal in sharing his story is to help people learn from his experiences, both good and bad. He says that life teaches us a lot. Regardless, he is appreciative of the wisdom he has gained. There are rays of light that Samson finds even in the prison's shadows. In his mind, hope is like a candle that stays lit forever. Despite the apparent futility of his situation, he remains steadfast because of this hope. He is aware that there is more to come from his tale and that lessons can be shared and learned. All of us, according to Samson, have hidden strengths that we fail to recognize when we need them. Our inner power is our greatest asset, he argues, and he prays that his narrative will encourage others to discover and channel their inner fortitude. His parting advice was to keep going no matter how tough things got. By doing so, he sets the stage for the subsequent section of his narrative, where the genuine conflict between righteousness and wickedness becomes more intense. The Israelites endured the oppression of the Philistines for 4 decades. A persistent feeling of dread and despair characterized this era of persecution. Battles were decidedly in favor of the Philistines due to their superior technology, particularly in the utilization of iron. The Philistines' weapons outlasted the Israelites' bronze ones and were more effective overall. This led to an unbalanced power dynamic that proved challenging to rectify. The spirit of the Israelites was eroded as the Philistines' technological advantage was shown with every fight. Along with their technological prowess, the Philistines were also experts in military strategy. By capitalizing on their advantages, they were able to subdue the Israelites. Their strategies were meticulously planned and carried out, rendering the Israelites' escape nearly impossible. The Israelite armies were frequently taken unawares and given little time to respond. There was no space for mistake in the Philistines' combat efficiency. Victory and continued tyranny were the goals of every action. Persecution by the Philistines was evident in the Israelites' daily life as well. The Philistines imposed their will on all spheres of society, including religion, commerce, and agriculture. They made life tough for the Israelites by imposing costly tributes and rules. Little food remained for families after each harvest, since a large part was taken. The Israelites frequently had to sell their items for pitiful rates because of the restrictions on trade. Israeli society was worn down by this relentless economic strain, which only served to heighten hopelessness. Regarding matters of faith, the Philistines did not only permit, but actively promoted the practice of their respective faiths. The Israelites' temptation to forsake their customs in pursuit of short-term relief sparked a spiritual battle. Israelite villages were contaminated with the worship of Philistine gods, which distorted their faith and sense of self. A spiritual as much as a bodily struggle was at play. As the Israelites continued to build altars in honor of Philistine gods, they continued to erode their national identity and power. Despite its existence, resistance was uncoordinated and frequently splintered. As a result of a lack of decisive and cohesive leadership, the Israelites were unable to effectively repel the Philistines. Occasionally, small rebel parties would arise, but the Philistines would swiftly put an end to them. Because the Israelite tribes were not cohesive, the oppressor had an easier time controlling them. The masses were left with a sense of hopelessness and acceptance after each failed uprising attempt. A potent weapon in the Philistine arsenal was the use of terror. A heavy penalty was imposed for any indication of disobedience. The widespread use of torture, public hangings, and banishment contributed to an atmosphere of fear that rendered the populace motionless. Everyone understood. No amount of defiance would be tolerated. Fear was used as a tool to keep the Israelites in line and discourage them from standing together against their shared adversary. In this setting, the figure of Samson becomes a beacon of hope. The Israelites were given hope for freedom by his incredible power and triumphs over the Philistines. The Israelites rejoiced over Samson's successes one by one. On the other hand, the Philistines were enraged by Samson because of his strength. They perceived him as a danger to their power. The relentless pursuit of Samson only served to instill hope in his people as he persisted in fighting. In spite of all the hardships, the Israelite customs and culture managed to endure. The Israelite people maintained their identity by passing down tales of their ancestors' exploits and the promises of God. The continuation of social cohesiveness and hope for a brighter future was aided by clandestine religious gatherings, rites, and the oral transmission of tales and lessons. The survival of the Israelite spirit depended on these minor gestures of cultural resistance. An example of perseverance is the Israelites, resolved to be themselves and keep their religion even while they were persecuted. They proved that resistance and the preservation of what matters most can be achieved even in the face of overwhelming odds. This tactic of nonviolent defiance proved that the physical might of the Philistines could not eradicate the very soul of the people who resisted them. Every narrative shared and tradition preserved represented a triumph over the oppressors. Despite the hardships, the 40 years of Philistine domination were formative. The value of standing together, believing and resisting was demonstrated to the Israelites by them. Because it bolstered the people's fighting spirit and resolve, each defeat was a stepping stone toward the ultimate triumph. The end of that dark age of tyranny was the breaking of the dawn into a new age of liberty and equality. This optimism is the beacon that keeps Samson's story alive. A visit from an angel was the catalyst that set everything in motion. The fact that Manoah's wife, a Danite woman, could not conceive caused her great anguish. As she went about her usual routine, a supernatural entity materialized before her. An unusual message was conveyed by an angel of the Lord. She was going to have a son with a mission. It was a turning point in her life. and the country of Israel as a whole. A moment of heavenly illumination. Signs of impending transformation were hinted at by the angel's appearance. Prior to the birth of her kid, the angel told Manoah's wife to observe a Nazarite vow, which is a commitment to dedication to God. The youngster was not to have his hair trimmed, and he was not to drink wine or any fermented beverages. She made this solemn promise to dedicate her unborn child to God. The angel's message seemed crystal obvious. The divine intervention of her son Samson would set Israel free from the Philistine captivity. It was a tremendous burden, but it offered a glimmer of promise to a troubled people. Hearing his wife's story, Manoah was confused and wanted to verify the heavenly message. He begged the angel to come back and offer them further guidance on how to bring up the promised son. The second time the angel appeared, this time to them both. It was because God had heard his request. With utmost respect, Manoah sought the angel's advice on how to bring up the youngster. Everyone was told the same thing again. Observance of the Nazarite vow by the mother during pregnancy and subsequent upbringing of Samson should be consistent with this vow. There was an air of impending doom, and Manoah sensed the gravity of the heavenly mission. A mixture of delight and duty accompanied the angel's message. Upon learning of her miracle pregnancy, Manoah's wife felt an overwhelming sense of purpose in her son's life. The promise of God was reinforced with every heartbeat of the unborn child. Following the angel's orders to the letter, she fasted from all foods and pleasures that could break her Nazarite vow. There was no condition on Manoah's support. In order to protect the angel's message, he became extremely watchful. Hoping and in awe of God, they waited together for Samson to be born. A sign of promise was upon Samson's birth. His parents saw his uniqueness from the moment he cried. The Hebrew origin of his name, Shin, alludes to the brightness that he would bring to Israel. His power and his destiny started to show early on. There are several accounts of his boyhood that attest to his extraordinary power. He was surrounded by a spiritual presence that was more powerful than his physical strength. To make sure he followed the angel's instructions, his parents watched over him intently. As he matured, Samson was taught the customs and histories of his people. Beyond what was normally possible for humans, he sensed that his life had a higher purpose. His parents instilled in him the values and principles outlined in the angel's message. The profound significance of his task was underscored by every instruction. The Nazarite vow and Samson's obligation to maintain his devotion to God were continual themes in his life. This dedication laid the groundwork for who he was. Samson had great intentions, but he was still only human, and he struggled with the same things the rest of us do. Even with an angel's promise, he was still tempted by worldly things. Being cognizant of this, his parents endeavored to shield and direct him. But his superhuman power often gave him the false impression that he could do everything he set his mind to. Still, the lessons the angel had taught him never left his thoughts. They served as constant reminders of his true strength and the importance of humility. There were signs throughout Samson's youth that his great destiny was about to be revealed. Those around him were astounded by his extraordinary strength. Not only were there bodily manifestations, but there were also spiritual ones. Samson had a way of giving his people faith and optimism. Every time he triumphed against an obstacle, it was taken as a sign that freedom was drawing near. Even though they were proud of him, his parents knew how much responsibility he had and how many threats he faced. A continual emblem of his dedication to God, the Nazarite vow forbade him to trim his hair. Samson saw more than just a physical characteristic in his hair. His dedication and fate were symbolized by it. As he matured, he realized that his power stemmed from following the pledge and God's will. By retelling the tale of the angel and the prenatal promise over and over again, his parents solidified his faith. His sense of self and his destiny were both shaped by this formative myth. Everyone around Samson could see the hand of God at work in his life. His decisions and deeds were driven by a deep sense of purpose. But he was human, and he had questions and concerns. As he faced each difficulty, he drew courage from the angel's promise and the unwavering faith that his parents had given him. In order to overcome the challenges that lay ahead, this spiritual groundwork was essential. The angel's tale served as a compass for both the here and now, as well as a window into the past. Samson, his loved ones, and the entire town were all profoundly affected by the heavenly promise. His supposed role as the savior who would set Israel free and at peace was widely anticipated. There was a lot of pressure, but it was also motivating. For them, every triumph, every act of bravery was a stepping stone on the road to freedom. Because they saw in Samson the embodiment of God's promise, the Israelites put their faith in him. Even when things got tough, Samson was driven to keep going by the trust of his people. Faithful and courageous tales abound in Samson's childhood home. His parents were very watchful and made sure he knew how important he was. Recounts of the great exploits of God's forefathers served to further establish Samson's place in the grand scheme of things. His extraordinary power was not merely a personal attribute. He was a tool in the divine hand. What sustained and aided him on his trip was this profound awareness of his mission. The heavenly promise was a constant presence in Samson's life. He knew that his power and talents were not for his own gain, but for the honor of God and the freedom of his people. He trained hard in anticipation of future confrontations, because he had a strong sense of purpose. He was well aware that his every move would affect the country as a whole. His life had purpose because of the weight of obligation, but it was also a burden. A watershed moment in Samson's narrative occurred when the angels came to him. It helped him understand his mission and get ready for the obstacles ahead. The promise's custodians, his parents, were instrumental in keeping him on the straight and narrow. The key to Israel's deliverance was their faith, together with Samson's power and resolve. With this rock-solid groundwork in place, Samson was prepared to confront the Philistines and carry out his mission. Everyone was in awe of Samson's extraordinary strength, even when he was a little boy. He possessed a unique blend of physical prowess and an innate sense of heavenly purpose that went beyond just muscular strength. Even as a young man, he began to show indications of extraordinary power. As he strolled through the Timnah vineyards once, a young and aggressive lion sprung in his way. Samson seized the lion without thinking and ripped it to shreds with his own hands, treating it like a baby goat. This incredible achievement demonstrated not only his strength, but also his destiny for big things to come. As word of Samson's victory spread, the Israelites began to regard him as a potential national hero. His stories were recounted with awe and respect. Legends were born out of every detail of his achievements, which gave hope to people of all ages that freedom from the Philistines was on the horizon. A beacon of light, Samson was more than a mere warrior. The morale of his people improved, and the intensity of their resistance increased with every foe he vanquished. The enslaved people looked to his extraordinary strength as a sign from on high, a response to their prayers. Despite his remarkable strength, Samson encountered obstacles that extended beyond the realm of physical exertion. Both the hopes and fears of his people and the ever-present danger posed by the Philistines were challenges he had to overcome. There were always more dangers and difficulties after each win, but Samson never gave up. He never wavered in his resolve or bravery. He had a higher calling and understood that his strength was a divine blessing. Even when obstacles seemed insurmountable, he remained focused thanks to this knowledge. Faith and resilience, not physical power, were Samson's greatest assets. There were many legendary battles between Samson and the Philistines throughout his life. When faced with 1,000 Philistines, he once prevailed by utilizing a donkey's jawbone. His strategic acumen and fighting prowess were on full display in this accomplishment, in addition to his physical power. Samson was a master at making do with what he had, and he could transform almost anything into a weapon. The message to the Philistines was sent loud and clear with each triumphant fight. The Israelites would resist with a vengeance. Samson personified the defiance and optimism of his people via his extraordinary strength. The battlefield was not the only arena in which Samson excelled. He used his might to accomplish miraculous things that didn't make sense or follow the laws of physics on multiple occasions. As an illustration, he pried open the gates of Gaza and hoisted them to a hilltop. This was more than simply a show of power. It was a statement of resistance to the Philistine rulers. My resolve and power will not be confined, no matter how much you attempt to imprison me, Samson seemed to be saying. The Israelites were tremendously moved by this act of rebellion, which gave them renewed hope that freedom was within reach. Even as Samson's strength continued to astound, the Philistines were relentless in their pursuit of him. Their control over the Israelites was in jeopardy so long as Samson remained free. They understood. The Philistines planned to capture him multiple times, but each time they failed to account for his wits and strength. In addition to his physical strength, Samson possessed a sharp mind and a keen eye for opportunity, which he used to his advantage. Even when faced with overwhelming odds, his brilliance and physical prowess made him an almost unbeatable opponent. Samson was also a master of motivating and leading others with his strength. His leadership and physical prowess made him stand out in a culture that placed a premium on such traits. The Israelites were brought together by his military triumphs, which weakened the Philistines. He encouraged people to stand up and fight for their freedom by becoming a symbol of resistance and resilience. True strength, according to his leadership, originates from dedication to a higher goal, which he demonstrated via his actions and example. The Israelites took great pleasure in Samson's power, which served as a symbol of their identity. He stood as a symbol of hope and heavenly might during a period of slavery and injustice. Legends were born out of the repeated, increasingly exaggerated accounts of his exploits, which served to motivate generations to come. Many looked at Samson as a chosen one, someone who had shown the world what faith and perseverance could accomplish. He was an inspiration to many who saw his resilience as a result of his unwavering faith and the power of God's promise. But Samson's might also drew the jealous gaze of crafty foes. When they realized they couldn't beat him in battle, the Philistines set out to find ways to weaken him. In addition to fighting Philistine soldiers, there was an ongoing struggle against the intrigues and betrayals of the Philistines. Given the gravity of the situation, Samson had to maintain a state of constant vigilance. In spite of everything that he went through, every success was more meaningful, and every loss taught him a lesson because of the way this tension molded his life and deeds. Samson kept his focus on the goal the whole time. His power lay not just in vanquishing foes, but also in rallying and defending his people. The Israelites' eventual deliverance was progressed with each victory. He believed that his life's work demanded not only courage, but also insight and conviction. There were inspiring moments among the many obstacles he faced on his path. God was the source of Samson's strength, and he knew that he could conquer all things through faith. The tale of Samson serves as a potent reminder that power is not limited to physical prowess. Faith, determination, and a sense of purpose all come together in this. In addition to protecting his people, Samson encouraged them to believe in a higher power by using his strength. Living one's life as one's purpose dictates is a powerful witness to the power of God. He shows us that having faith and staying determined can get us through anything. So, Samson is still an inspiration today, a real example of how inner strength can triumph over external challenges. Even though he was strong and determined, Samson was also a guy with strong emotions. Love, rather than battle, presented him with one of his greatest obstacles. A number of difficulties and cautions ensued as a result of his decision to fall in love with a Philistine woman. He was discouraged from associating with pagans by his parents, who were aware of the risks involved. Their main argument was that he should pick a woman from their own tribe. However, Samson disregarded his parents' sensible advice and went on and fulfilled his heart's desire. Everyone around him trusts and cares for him because of his passion. The Israelites were worried that his mission and safety could be jeopardized due to this relationship. But Samson let his feelings lead him to focus solely on the love he felt. This woman was unique and exceptional in his eyes. The power of his emotions, he thought, might alter fate. On the other hand, his demise was hastened by a chain reaction that started with this forbidden love. That even the hardest people can't help but give in to emotional pressures is a sobering thought. There were joyous times and difficult times throughout the marriage to the Philistine woman. Knowing of the union, the Philistines saw a chance to undermine Samson. His wife felt forced to betray Samson as she tried to solve a riddle during the wedding feast. A chain reaction of events leading to mistrust and wrath ensued after she caved to the Philistines' threats. Feeling betrayed, Samson reacted violently and with a thirst for revenge. The once passionate and loving relationship swiftly devolved into animosity and mistrust. Unfortunate events were foreshadowed by this. An archetypal tale of how emotions could impede rational thought is that of Samson and his Philistine wife. Samson, despite his great might as a warrior, was nonetheless susceptible to love. Emotionally driven, hasty judgments can lead to disastrous outcomes, as his case shows. Despite his parents' best efforts to warn him of the perils, he listened to his heart instead. I experienced both delight and pain as a result of this choice. This serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of balancing emotions with logic, particularly in situations where the ramifications are substantial. Samson persisted in following his heart despite the cautions and difficulties. Love, in his view, could triumph over all. On the other hand, his romantic decisions were putting him in more difficult positions. He jeopardized not just his mission, but also his own life by associating with Philistine women. However, love may be a dazzling and overwhelming emotion. No amount of physical might could save Samson from the allure of his own desires. What makes his narrative both heartbreaking and compelling is the contrast between his strength and vulnerability. The tangled web of relationships between the Israelites and the Philistines was mirrored in Samson's love relationships as well. The smaller-scale romances reflected the broader conflicts and tensions between the two countries. The Philistines viewed Samson as both a danger and a chance to emotionally manipulate the Israelites into submission. In contrast, the Israelites were worried that Samson's inclinations would divert him from his heavenly mission, so they watched his decisions with anxiety. Every interaction became much more fraught due to this intricate dynamic. One of Samson's most famous romantic choices was his intense love for Delilah. The leaders of the Philistines urged Delilah, who was both alluring and crafty, to find out what made Samson so strong. A substantial quantity of money would be hers in exchange. Samson was so enamored with Delilah that he failed to perceive her true motives. She used her emotional manipulation skills to get him to spill the beans about his superpower. As a Nazarite, he had sworn off cutting his hair. In light of this new information, it is clear that Samson's passions were the driving force for his demise. Samson was dealt a terrible blow by Delilah's treachery. A loved one deceived him, and he thought he was untouchable the whole time. This betrayal was a spiritual as well as an emotional and physical setback. The Philistines snatched his locks while he slept, having discovered his strength's secret. When Samson awoke, he was feeble and defenseless, and he was soon taken captive. This chain of events demonstrated the dangers of letting his emotions control him. Learning to trust and be vulnerable was a tough experience. With his sight impaired and confined in prison, Samson had ample opportunity to contemplate his decisions. As much as the blade had taken his sight, he realized that his passions and ambitions had blinded him. The betrayal by Delilah was a watershed moment that made him face his own frailties. A new kind of strength, spiritual rather than physical, was bestowed to him by his shadow. Seeking a final opportunity to atone, he fervently pleaded to God. This self-reflection demonstrated that there is always hope for a better future, no matter how dire the circumstances. The perils of going with one's heart alone are cautioned against throughout Samson's tale and his perilous loves. Because of how strong our emotions are, we may end up making choices that are detrimental to our health or the success of our objective. But there is also a message of redemption and hope in the story. Despite his many transgressions, Samson was able to overcome them and achieve his purpose in life. The moral of the story is that we can always start over and discover our true calling, no matter how many times we make poor decisions. Samson proved that there is more to strength than meets the eye, despite his many shortcomings. Like the human condition, his love story was complicated and full of ups and downs. He stresses the importance of staying true to one's values and the fact that we are all susceptible to temptation. But he also demonstrates that resilience and salvation are attainable, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. All of us can learn from his narrative, which exemplifies the strength of faith and the capacity to triumph over adversity. The news that his wife had been betrayed to another man made Samson's wrath boil up. A sense of unbridled wrath washed over Samson at this treachery, and he resolved to exact unimaginable vengeance on the Philistines. As if that weren't enough of an undertaking, he also tied torches to the tails of the 300 foxes he had trapped. Not only did he want to show the Philistines that they could not defeat or humiliate him without consequences, but he was also demonstrating his might and cunning by this deed. Scared and panicked, the foxes dashed through the grain fields of the Philistines, igniting everything in their wake. Samson unleashed a torrent of destruction. All of the Philistines' harvests, wheat, grapes, and olives, went to ash. The Philistine economy was devastated by Samson's act of vengeance, which proved that he was strong physically and had a keen strategic intellect. Everyone understood. Severe repercussions would ensue from any effort to enslave or degrade him. Even though they were used to oppressing the Israelites, the Philistines were helpless in the face of Samson's fury. This act of vengeance was symbolic of a declaration of war against his people's oppressors, as well as a personal vendetta. There are few tales as peculiar and interesting as the one about Samson catching foxes and using them as weapons of vengeance in the Old Testament. In this scene, we witness not just his brute strength but also his mastery of the elements. It exemplifies the fact that mental fortitude is just as important as physical strength. Samson dealt a devastating blow to the Philistines by using unconventional tactics, which were unsuccessful in traditional warfare. The psychological and bodily effects of this act of vengeance were equally devastating, undermining the Philistines' sense of superiority. Both the betrayal of Samson himself and the persistent tyranny of his people served to inflame his wrath. A fox's tail bearing a torch represented his wrath and his thirst for retribution. The fields of the Philistines were engulfed in fire as a tangible representation of his animosity and resolve. Samson was able to channel his pent-up sadness and resentment into this act of vengeance. The destruction of the farms was a strong statement that he would fight back against his captors, refusing to remain a helpless victim. After seeing their farms destroyed, the Philistines reacted quickly and brutally. In their vengeance, they kidnapped and murdered Samson's parents. The perpetual state of strife and tension was brought about by this vicious cycle of violence and retribution. The feud between Samson and the Philistines became worse with every act of retaliation. But the more the Philistines did, the more Samson became enraged and resolved to fight back. The escalating violence demonstrated how bitter the dispute was and how much animosity existed between the combatants. Both the Israelite and Philistine societies were deeply affected by the destruction that Samson brought about. The Israelites took it as a sign that they could persevere in the face of adversity. Many others were encouraged to believe in the possibility of liberation by Samson's bravery and resolve. It served as a continual reminder to the Philistines that their dominance could be challenged. They witnessed the unwavering resolve of a guy who refused to submit as his fields burnt and his harvest was ruined. This act of retaliation changed the tide of the war between the two nations. Anger and pain, as shown in Samson's story of vengeance, can be transformed into tremendous deeds. But it's also a cautionary tale about what happens when we give in to our wrath. Though it provided short-term respite and a sense of psychological triumph, the destruction of the Philistines' fields ultimately led to increased bloodshed and misery. As the vicious cycle of vengeance and retaliation demonstrates, violence frequently leads to further acts of violence. The lessons we can learn from Samson's story about the need of finding peaceful solutions to conflict are timeless. The ethics and fairness of Samson's vengeance were also called into doubt. The betrayal he endured made his anger and actions comprehensible, but they had far-reaching implications that hurt many innocent people. Not only did the Philistines lose resources in the destroyed fields, but many households also lost their means of subsistence. An essential aspect of Samson's narrative is this moral ambiguity, which demonstrates how the boundaries between right and wrong can be imprecise and hard to distinguish. His life should make us reflect on the results of our choices and how we pursue fairness. In the midst of all the carnage, Samson never lost sight of his mission. He was aware that his purpose extended beyond the confines of his own suffering. His people's emancipation was advanced with each act of vengeance. He justified his conflict with the Philistines by viewing it as a struggle for liberty and equality. This belief kept him going when everything seemed to be working against him. Whether Samson won or lost, he fought for the honor and existence of his people in a larger struggle. The story of Samson shows us how complicated people can be. A guy of tremendous bravery and profound vulnerability, he possessed both strengths and weaknesses. Though brutal, his actions of vengeance were also a manifestation of his devotion to his people and his desire for fairness. The fact that he was able to keep battling when it seemed like everything was going wrong is a lesson that even heroes are human. Anger and suffering, when channeled into deeds that alter the trajectory of events, can be exemplified by Samson, who had remarkable fortitude and resolve. The lowest point of Samson's life came when he was betrayed. He loved Delilah, but the Philistines bribed her to tell them his strength's secret. Samson, oblivious of the Nazarite vow and overcome with love, told her that his power came from his long hair. Samson woke up to find that his strength had gone after Delilah chopped his hair while he slept. Swiftly apprehending him, the Philistines cruelly blinded him, robbing him of his sight for all time. For the once mighty hero, this was the start of a new chapter of shame and anguish. Both the physical and symbolic aspects of Samson's blindness were present. His eyesight had been severely impaired due to his love and trust issues. He was taken to Gaza by the Philistines and put to the humiliating task of grinding grain in prison, which is often done by the lowest and most hated members of society. As the millstone turned, it brought back painful memories of Delilah's treachery and his power and independence being taken away. During this time, he had to rely on his faith and strength of character more than ever. The once respected and feared Samson was now a crippled, ashamed shell of his former self. Samson discovered optimism, even amid the prison's darkest hours. Even though he had lost all bodily power, he understood that his relationship with God had not ended. The fact that his hair was growing back in with each passing day was a metaphor for the prospect of his strength returning. Not only did he develop physically, but he also spiritually. Samson started to think about his transgressions and look for a fresh relationship with God. These acts of self-reflection and spiritual rebirth demonstrated that there is always a chance for salvation and change, no matter how dire the situation. In prison, life was hard and never-ending. A life of relentless toil and continual contempt befell Samson, who had become accustomed to utilizing his power to achieve magnificent achievements. Because of his disability, the Philistines could use him as a showpiece for their triumphs. Every remark and jest served as a sobering reminder of his downfall. Samson, though, did not give in to despair, but rather grew stronger in his faith during this trying period. He had faith that God had more in store for him and that his work was far from done. He underwent the spiritual refining process throughout this time of suffering, which ultimately led to his ultimate redemption. A lot of Samson's life and decisions might be rethought during his time behind bars. He knew that God had given him strength, but he had squandered it without prudence and modesty. The blindness and shame he was now experiencing were consequences of his hasty judgments and trust issues. A fresh insight into his mission and reliance on God emerged from this introspection. Samson realized that his faith and loyalty to God were more important than his physical power. He felt more equipped to complete the task at hand after considering it from this fresh angle. The strength of faith and perseverance is shown in Samson's account of life in jail. He maintained optimism even when he was down and out. There was a chance to re-establish a relationship with God amid the daily struggles. Both his bodily and spiritual power were starting to regain what they had lost. The haughty Philistines failed to account for Samson's miraculous recovery. The spiritual progress taking on within him went unnoticed, since all they could see was a defeated man. His quiet and gradual recuperation set the stage for his eventual redemption. A clear indication that God had not left Samson was the fact that his hair grew while he was in jail. The Nazarite vow he had taken and the promise of God were both symbolized by the regrowth of his hair. It was clear to Samson that his strength came from his unwavering commitment to God. He prayed more earnestly, seeking pardon and a second opportunity to realize his destiny. He needed this spiritual rejuvenation to tackle the obstacles that lay ahead. His ordeal with blindness and shame had fortified his character and strengthened his resolve to do God's will. As a symbol of their triumph against Samson, the Philistines would often showcase the captured hero at festivals and festivities. They thought they had won the war and that Samson was no longer a threat. But in their ignorance, they did not know that they were giving Samson the strength to recommit himself and have faith. His determination was unshaken by any form of humiliation or insult. He was hell-bent on making the most of a chance he was sure would present itself. His unwavering trust in God was his greatest asset, and he was prepared to tap into it at the appropriate time. The tale of Samson's perseverance and eventual salvation while incarcerated is an inspiring one. The lesson it imparts is that no matter how low we fall, there is always a way to get back up. We can triumph over insurmountable odds if we are faithful and resolute. Despite his overwhelming physical strength, Samson realized that his real power came from his faith and connection with God. Everyone can take something out from this and use it in their own life. We must never give up hope or let our faith and resolve waver in the face of overwhelming adversity. A monument to the transforming power of religion is Samson's journey from strength to humiliation and ultimately to redemption. It demonstrates that we can rediscover our purpose and draw strength from our religion, no matter how bad things get. Blind and ashamed, Samson discovered a spiritual fortitude that enabled him to do his last act of atonement. This narrative serves as a potent reminder that our inner strength is the source of our outside strength, and that nothing can stand in our way if we are determined and have faith. As Samson gets ready for his ultimate display of faith and power, his story progresses. A new strength was bestowed upon Samson in the shadows of his jail. His faith was being revitalized, and his hair was starting to come back. Seeking the Lord's wisdom and power, he prayed ceaselessly for hours. Even though he was well aware of his many failures, he held fast to the belief that God had a plan for his life. This steadfast confidence, in the face of hardship, was the thing that kept Samson going. Redeeming myself became easier with each passing day behind bars. Despite everything that had happened, he was certain that his shining moment was yet to come. Even after Samson experienced a spiritual revival, the Philistines kept using him as a showpiece in their festivities. They brought Samson to show off to the reveling audience at a huge celebration honoring their deity, Dagon. Their triumph against him was, in their minds, final. But Samson's confidence and God's promise were his greatest assets. Upon reaching the temple, he requested the young lad escorting him to position him between the two central pillars that supported the structure. His last act of atonement would begin with this modest request. In his final prayer to the Lord, Samson placed his hands on the pillars. Praying for the fortitude to exact revenge for his blindness, he prayed to God. His plea for physical fortitude was secondary to his requests for salvation and the realization of his eternal destiny. This, he realized, would be the last sacrifice he would make in order to achieve his goal of emancipating his people. An incredible sense of power started to course through his body, as if it were God's way of responding. Samson pushed the pillars with all his strength, driven by his unwavering faith and unwavering determination. In a matter of seconds, the pillars collapsed as the temple started to shake. A roof gave down, engulfing the thousands of onlookers and the leaders of the Philistines who were inside. A major triumph for the Israelites was achieved when this display of power leveled the Philistine command headquarters. Samson paid the ultimate price for his people's freedom from Philistine rule. He gave his life for them. This final act of heroism made up for the sorrow that had marked his life. Faith and persistence may bring triumph, even in the most terrible situations, as he proved. The Israelites mourned and rejoiced at the same time at Samson's death. Though they lamented his departure, they acknowledged the significance of their hero's sacrifice. His life, with all its ups and downs, was a magnificent witness of faith and redemption, and he had accomplished his destiny. In remembrance of Samson and his sacrifice, the Israelites laid him to rest in the grave of Manoah, his father. For millennia, people looked to Samson's story as a model of perseverance, faith, and finding salvation in the face of adversity. The lessons we may take away from Samson's story are that inner strength is the source of outer strength, and that we can find meaning and purpose in the face of adversity. As a last act of atonement, he released his people by his sacrifice. In spite of our shortcomings, he demonstrates that we are capable of great things when we are resolute and have faith in ourselves. The story of Samson teaches us a profound lesson about putting our faith in God and making the most of our talents for the benefit of others. His life and work show that there is always hope for overcoming huge odds. Samson embodies the human experience with his ups and downs, triumphs and tragedies. Conflicts arise both within and outside of us, and we all experience periods of faith and uncertainty. Redeeming ourselves in our lowest hours is the message of Samson's story. We must press on, fight the good battle, and never give up. It serves as a reminder that our faith and spirit are more powerful than our physical muscles, and that we have the ability to transform our weaknesses into strengths and our failures into victories through perseverance and faith in God. An act of selfless devotion. Samson gave his life for his people. He showed unparalleled bravery and selflessness by voluntarily giving his life to rescue others. An act that will be remembered forever. Despite the ups and downs of his life, he was able to achieve atonement and have his name etched into posterity through a heroic deed. Every one of us has the capacity to have a profound impact on this planet. And Samson teaches us that it is possible to be forgiven. Even when we mess up, faith and the ability to persevere in the face of adversity are the themes that run throughout his life. We are all reminded of our own paths and decisions as we consider Samson's life. He teaches us that faith is essential, even in the face of seemingly impossible odds. His example should motivate us to seek atonement and make good use of our gifts and skills. In spite of his frailties, Samson exemplifies the fact that we are all capable of finding meaning in our lives and making a difference. His life serves as an ongoing example for everyone who aspires to be a courageous, determined, and faith-filled person. After listening to Samson's story, you should think about the profound truths it contains. After this pausing containing part, his life was a blend of success and tragedy, of strength and weakness. No matter how many times we mess up, Samson teaches us that there is always a chance to make amends and have an impact. His story is an inspiring example of how we can face and conquer adversity when we draw strength from within. In spite of his frailties, Samson exemplifies the fact that we are all capable of finding meaning in our lives and making a difference. When you're down and out, how can you draw power from Samson's story? Maybe the weight of the decisions you've made in the past is making it hard for you to make new, easier ones. Keep in mind that you have a fresh start every day to find your purpose again and seek redemption. Belief in a higher power and dedication to that cause gave Samson the strength he needed. Where will you, on the other hand, get the power from? Join us on this educational and inspirational journey by subscribing to our channel and enabling notifications. That way, you can stay up to date with all the tales and lessons we provide, which can guide you towards finding your own courage and redemption. Come be a part of our community and let us help you discover purpose and courage in the face of adversity, just like Samson did.